I woke up to the smell of burning toast and betrayal. Not metaphorical betrayal either. Literal. Smoke curling in lazy spirals from the kitchen toaster. I stumbled over my own 2 feet, hair sticking up like I'd been electrocuted in my sleep, and found my mom staring at me like I was the villain in her lifelong horror story. "You didn't hear me knock?" she said, voice sharp enough to cut through the smoke alarm screech. I blinked, trying to process the words before the chaos in my chest settled down enough for syntax. I didn't smell anything. Yet, she rolled her eyes. Typical. Mom had that gift of making you feel like an idiot, even when you weren't. But that morning it was different. Her stare lingered, like she was trying to weigh my soul against something I'd done years ago but couldn't remember. I'm 30 minutes late for work, my car smelling like burnt bread, and I feel like I'm 5 again, being judged for something I didn't even do. I'm in my late 20s, working as a project manager at a nondescript office in Cedar Falls, Iowa, but mornings like this make me feel like I'm trapped in a sitcom I didn't audition for. "What's wrong with you?" she asked, finally breaking eye contact to poke at the charred toast with a spatula. "I'm fine," I said, lying so casually it made me dizzy. But I wasn't fine, because the toast wasn't the problem. And the truth, God, the truth was sitting at the back of my mind like a ticking bomb I'd been ignoring. My dad. My real dad. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. And the last time I did, he had said something I'd never forget. "Don't trust the people who say they love you. They'll always surprise you." I'd laughed then, of course. A bitter laugh that didn't reach my eyes. But now, in the smell of smoke and frying disappointment, it felt like prophecy. My mom didn't notice the way my hands trembled as I grabbed my coat. She probably wouldn't. She had her own secrets tucked in drawers and between the lines of her sentences, and I'd spent my entire life tiptoeing around them. Mom always had that calm, too cool for school demeanor, but there was fire in her. Always fire. And lately, I'd started wondering if some of it was meant for me. "You going to work? Or just stare at me all day?" she asked, smirking. I nodded. I left. Outside, the autumn air was sharp, smelling like wet leaves and exhaust fumes. The town quiet enough to make every car engine seem like a declaration. My truck rattled as I drove, carrying me past empty storefronts and the smell of someone else's mistakes lingering in the breeze. And then I saw him. Across the street from the diner where I stopped for coffee, my dad's truck was parked crooked, the windows down. He was older, grayer, but unmistakable. Leaning against the truck, he lit a cigarette, squinting at the morning sun like he owned it. For a second, I didn't move. I just watched, the bitter taste of everything. Childhood, lost time, broken promises, filling my mouth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to hit him. But mostly, I wanted answers. And I knew getting them would mean walking straight into the fire. "Why now?" I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles hurt. Because the truth doesn't come on time. Comes when it wants. And apparently, today, it wanted to crash through my life like a drunk driver on a Friday night. I parked across the street, pretending to check my phone, but my eyes never left him. Dad hadn't seen me yet, or if he had, he didn't care. That's what I hated the most. Not the absence, not the distance, but the fact that indifference felt like a birthright for him. I finished my coffee in silence, bitter and cold, like my mood. The diner smelled of fried eggs and stale grease, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I could hear the waitresses chatting about weekend plans and high school football scores, and it made my stomach twist. Everyone else's life was moving forward. Mine felt like it had stalled on the edge of a cliff 5 years ago. Finally, I made a decision. I crossed the street. Each step felt heavier than the last, like gravity had decided to punish me for daring to hope. Dad didn't move. He just leaned on the truck, cigarette smoke curling around him like some cheap halo. "You're late," he said, not looking at me. I froze. Not because of the words, but because of the tone. That same casual judgment that had haunted my childhood. Hi," I said. My voice sounded foreign even to me. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "You're here." That wasn't a question. That was a statement, and it felt like a verdict. "What are you doing here?" I asked, suddenly aware of how small I felt next to him, how the years hadn't softened his presence. "Waiting," he said. "Or maybe I was hoping you'd come. Funny how life works." I laughed, but it was hollow, broken. "Yeah, funny. Real funny." He flicked the cigarette, ashes scattering across the asphalt. "I hear you've been asking questions," he said. His voice was calm, unnervingly calm, like a storm trapped in a bottle. "What do you mean?" My pulse jumped. "About the past. About your mom. About me." The words hit harder than I expected. My hands clenched at my sides. "I don't. I just want to know why you left. Why you disappeared. Why I had to. Why you had to grow up without a dad." He finished for me. He exhaled smoke slowly. "You think it was easy for me?" I froze. For a moment, the man I'd hated for years looked human. Vulnerable, even. But it didn't last. Not really. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, and I felt it clawing up my throat. "You think that excuses anything?" I asked, voice rising. "Do you have any idea what I went through? Watching everyone else's dads show up, and mine vanished." His eyes hardened. "Life isn't fair, son. You're smart enough to know that." Smart enough. Yeah, thanks, Dad. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. "You know what I'm thinking?" I said slowly. "I'm thinking that maybe some people don't deserve second chances. Maybe some people get what they've earned. And maybe I can make sure you pay for every damn day you weren't there." His laugh was quiet, low, but it cut through me. "Careful, kid. Revenge is a dangerous road. Once you start, it doesn't end." I looked at him, really looked, and I realized something terrifying. I wanted to take that road anyway. "You left me," I said. "You left her. You left everything behind. And now I get to decide if that's how it ends." He said nothing, just watched me, like I was the storm and he was the calm that had been waiting too long to respond. That night, I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I could still smell his smoke on my clothes. I could still hear the weight of his indifference pressing against my chest. And I knew one thing. I couldn't just confront him. I had to outsmart him. Revenge wasn't just a thought. It was becoming a plan. And plans had a funny way of changing everything. The bar at the end of Main Street smells like spilled beer and old regrets. It's where my dad learned how to be someone else. Clink a glass, tell a joke, leave town in the morning without anyone noticing. I sat at the far end of the counter, nursing a soda that tasted like disappointment, watching him through the haze. He was talking to a man with a face like a folded map, the kind of guy whose eyes had been in too many places. My chest felt tight, like my ribs were a fist trying to claw its way out. I'd always thought revenge would feel cinematic, slow motion, dramatic music, some righteous thunder. Instead, it felt like paperwork, like logistics, like the project plans I drew up at work. Define the problem, map the risks, list resources. I was a 28-year-old project manager. I scheduled micro-milestones and Gantt charts for heartbreak. "You sure about this?" Mark asked, sliding into the stool beside me. Mark and I grew up in rival baseball leagues, but we were friends now in that quiet, grown-up way. He fixes cars at his dad's shop and knows how to make a wrench feel like currency. He'd agreed to help because, I guess, he's the kind of person who doesn't leave when things get messy. "I don't know if I'm sure about anything," I said, "except that I can't let him get away with whatever he did." "You remember what Carl said last time?" Mark asked. "About revenge being a dangerous road?" "Yeah." I tasted the memory of that line like something sour. "I remember. There's a phrase that stuck with me from a half-remembered conversation with my dad years ago." He'd shrugged and said, almost tenderly, "You don't get to pick who you hurt." I'd laughed then, because how could he say something like that? Now it looped in my head like a broken record until it smothered everything else. I started small background checks, property records, a busier-than-usual stint of late nights digging through public archives at the county clerk's office. Cedar Falls isn't big. Secrets don't hide well here. They just wear different coats. I found small things first. A lien on an old truck, a judgment against a business name that sounded familiar because my mom had once mentioned it under her breath, like a curse. Each tiny discovery was a match to be struck. There was a folder in the town hall labeled with my mom's maiden name. It smelled faintly of cedar and printer toner. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I flipped through copies of canceled checks, a letter from a debt collector, a note, handwritten, saying, "Paid to settle." My hands fumbled because it wasn't just paperwork. It was proof that my mom had been carrying something heavy for a long time. She had been paying for his mistakes, for his choices. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the folder against the fluorescent-lit wall and watch every lie in our house crumble. Instead, I folded the papers back together, careful as if I was handling a wing of a bird. There was this horrible, sharp realization. Any plan I made to hurt him would ricochet. It would hit my mom the hardest. "You can't do this," Mark said later that night when I told him what I'd found. We were in my kitchen, the light over the sink buzzing like a mosquito. "If you expose him, she loses everything she's been keeping afloat." I pressed my forehead to the cold countertop. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and old coffee. I wanted to be noble. I wanted to be the son who put down the stone and walked away. But the throbbing in my chest told me a different truth. There's a certain hunger when you've been abandoned. You want the world to know who did it. You want accountability. Or you want something that feels like it. "What if he deserves it?" I asked, and my voice sounded small. "What if he's walked around for years thinking he can steel himself against the people he hurt?" Mark didn't answer right away. He looked at me like he'd been given a riddle with no clean solution. "Then you do it in a way that doesn't kill your mom with it," he said finally. "You make him accountable but leave her standing." That line should have been a comfort. Instead, it tightened the knot in my stomach. How do you pull someone down without cutting the rope that holds up the whole damn family? I started formulating something cruel but calibrated, expose the lie but control the fallout. Leak the judgment to the bar's landlord. Anonymously drop a binder of records at the diner where the old men gossip. Quiet whispers that would travel faster than any written notice. Use small-town cruelty as a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. And yet, every time I imagined the moment he found out, his face when the past caught up, I also imagined my mother sitting in a kitchen with her hands folded in her lap, eyes empty. I pictured her reading headlines, seeing the letters, hearing people speculate. I pictured the charred toast from that morning, the smell of it burning into the wallpaper like a brand. This is where the moral part of me fought the visceral. The part that had learned to be empathetic in philosophy classes, who'd once written papers about justice and forgiveness, kept whispering, "There are better ways." The other part, the part that had been a kid waiting on a father who never came, screamed for equilibrium. "Make it even." "You scared?" Mark asked one late night as we sat on the hood of his truck, looking out over the lights of Cedar Falls. The wind smelled like rain and something metallic, like pennies left in a pocket too long. "Yeah," I admitted. "I'm scared of what I'm becoming." "You always were careful, man." He nudged me with his shoulder. "Don't become a monster because he was one." What if I already am? That night I dreamt of my father standing at the edge of a field, calling my name. The sky was bruised purple. When I reached him, he turned and handed me a photograph I'd never seen. An image of my mother laughing with a man who wasn't my father. I woke up with the photograph burning in my hand and the taste of pennies in my mouth. There's a sentence that lodged itself in my head and refused to leave. "You can choose how you break." It sounded like a fortune cookie proverb or a line from a movie, but it felt like the hinge on which everything would swing. I had a plan that could hum along without bloodshed. Mostly, it involved pressure, exposure, and the town's appetite for gossip. It involved making him feel the weight of his choices where it hurt most. Reputation, money, the quiet places people hide. It required patience, and patience was the one thing I had in excess. I also had to decide whether to protect my mother or use her as collateral. That choice stared back at me in the dark when I lay awake, flashlight on the ceiling like a tiny interrogation lamp. I felt the moral razor edge of it. And in the quiet, I whispered into the dark, "If this destroys her, I can never forgive myself." So I made a rule for the plan. No direct hits to her safety. No public shaming that would land at her door. Find him, make him pay, but keep her out of the crossfire. It was a compromise. Felt like one. It also felt like a lie. I thought the hard part would be pulling the trigger. It wasn't. The hard part was the quiet after. I dropped the binder at the diner on a rainy Tuesday. Same place where old men trade rumors like baseball cards. I left it under a sugar jar with a note. For curious eyes. 2 days later, a landlord called the bar owner. 2 days after that, the town's rumor mill was in full swing. My phone vibrated with unknown numbers and smug texts. Mark clapped me on the back like we'd won something. But when the dust settled, I felt nothing like victorious. I felt thin, like someone had shaved away the easy part and left the real work exposed. They called my dad in at the bar at noon. He showed up with that old tilt to his jaw, the same way he used to when he was hiding whiskey in his glove box. The bar was full. The air smelled of stale beer and the oil from the fryers. He stood in the middle of the crowd like a man in the dock. "You got some explaining to do, Carl," Joe from the hardware store said, folding his arms. He didn't beg. He didn't fight. He looked at my mom first, and the sound that came out of him was smaller than I expected. "I left because I thought I could fix something," he said, voice gravelly. "I thought I could fix us by going away." He looked at me then, really looked. I wasn't brave enough to stay. I stayed cowardly and distant. That's on me. There it was, his confession, blunt as a cleaver. He said the sentence that had been echoing in my head for years, but with a different weight. Not an excuse, just a map of his cowardice. "You don't get a pass," I shouted. Came out raw and unedited. "You don't get to vanish and then expect forgiveness." He nodded. "I know." Mom stood in the doorway, hands clenched around her purse. The whole room leaned toward her like a tide. I'd planned for him to lose his job, to have the town close ranks and shut him out. I'd planned to watch him realize what absence costs. Instead, she walked forward and said something that broke me. "You think I didn't know?" she said quietly, voice steady. "I knew. I paid his debts for years because I wanted him to come home, if only to keep my pride intact. I thought if I fixed his messes, I could keep my son from living with the hole he left behind." Her eyes met mine. Up close, I could see the small lines cut into her face, fatigue like a country road map. "You can choose how you break," she told him. Then she looked at me. "Or how you heal." That line, "you can choose how you break," it landed like a verdict and a benediction at once. I carried it as a threat. She offered it back as a choice. I wanted revenge. I wanted to watch him suffer. But looking at my mother, at the quiet, steady ruin she'd held together for us, I realized my plan would only reopen wounds for her. My vindictiveness would be a knife in her hands. So I did something unexpected. I stepped up onto a crate between two booths and told the truth, loud and ugly and human. I told them about the files, about the liens, about how I'd left the binder. I told them about the nights I'd pretended to be fine. When I finished, the room was perfectly, painfully still. "He hurt us," I said, looking at my dad. "But I don't want to be the kind of person who breaks something to make him feel it. I want to be the kind of person who builds something else." Dad looked at me like he'd been given a sentence and had to serve it. He promised then, in front of everyone, to try to go to counseling, to make reparations where he could, to stop running. It was small. It was humiliating for him. It was also the first honest thing he'd done in years. The town didn't forgive him overnight. My plan didn't shatter him into dust. He lost a few friends, a little pride, maybe a local gig. But he showed up afterward, awkwardly, like a man with a borrowed suit, and started paying dues. I didn't get the cinematic revenge I'd rehearsed. What I got was messier and quieter. A crack that let light in. Mom started taking late shifts at the antique shop she loved, laughing sometimes when she forgot to be guarded. I started setting boundaries instead of booby traps. On the ride home that night, the truck smelled like wet leather and cheap cologne. I rolled down the window and let the cold night air slap my face awake. I thought of the photo in my dream, of laughing faces that didn't belong to the men who'd hurt us. I kept thinking of the line my dad had said once, the one that used to sound like a threat. Don't trust the people who say they love you. Now it sounded different. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was a map. I realized I didn't want to be trapped by it. I wanted to keep the people who loved me and be the kind of man who earned that love back when he lost it. Revenge tasted good in my head. In practice, it tasted like ash. But choosing how to break or how to heal, tastes like something I can live with.